Hey, Koday. Good morning. I see only.
Balaji, can you just check where are the other team members? If you have a group. Adam, I will also check from my side.
Yeah, Lakshmi, you can wait. I just had another question. Guys, how about this Friday? Are you guys working or is it a holiday for you? Hey, am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Hey, Selva. So do you have office this Friday or is it a holiday?
Friday is office only. This Friday is holiday only.
For all the branches?
Chennai it's holiday. I'm not sure about Mumbai.
Okay, I think you, Koday, all are from Chennai, right? So is there anyone from
Yes, sir.
Mumbai office? No one from Mumbai office? Okay, probably let me check with the team about Friday. Because I was told Friday we will have a session. That's the reason I just wanted to check. All right. Probably we'll get started. Is the screen visible?
Yeah, yes, it was.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, just to recap, last week we were trying to see how do we automate the process of creating an image. Okay, and for that we were using a file called as Dockerfile. So basically it's a text file in which you give the instructions and the Docker daemon will run all those instructions on the background and it will create the image for us without any manual intervention. Okay, so for that we were trying to see what are the different instructions that we will be giving. So to start with, from is an instruction which will tell for the image, there has to be a temporary container in which we need to do all the steps. So what is the temporary container should be created from which base image? So that is what we call this as from. And once you create a temporary container from this base image, what are the steps that you want to run inside that image is what we are going to do using this run instruction. So anything that you give using run, this will run it as a command inside the temporary container created. And in that, if you want to set up a default startup command or first command, then we will be using CMD. Okay. Now, this is how when we used the Jenkins image in the practice, or Nginx image, Apache image, or CentOS image. So if you do not tell the startup command, every image will have its own startup command. So the equivalent of that is where CMD will come into the picture. But the difference between CMD and entry point is, for both of them, if you do not give the startup command, then the default will pick. But if you have given CMD, and if a user is passing some options, then the default command will be replaced with the user command. Whereas if you use it as entry point, then no matter what user passes, it will always run the default command plus whatever user has passed, it will be added as an argument to this. Okay. So that was the difference that we were seeing. Now, to move forward, what are the other options that we have, which we need to understand? Okay. Now, let's say that there is an image and you want to create a container out of it. And inside that, you want to copy a file, because as soon as a container runs, what if you want a file to be already available? Now, this is where if you want the file to be available inside your container, then it should be coming from the image, correct? And how do you get it inside the image? So while we create the image using Dockerfile, we need to tell. But once again, how will you copy a file which is available on your host machine, that to be available inside the image that you are generating? So this is where what we have to do. We have to use an instruction called copy. Using that, we will tell what is your source file which is available on your current machine, and the destination. So the destination is nothing but the temporary container that you're going to create, and in that container where to put. So now what will happen? At the end, whatever is available in this container, it will get converted into an image, right? So that's where, if you want to create an image, then using the instruction on Dockerfile, you can create the image. And that is where copy is the instruction which will copy that to the temporary container. Now, just to show you the diagram for that, let me just go back to this. Okay. You understand, this is the basic thing that we were talking about. So in this, what will happen? Whatever you want, you put it into your temporary container and then convert it into an image. So the Dockerfile is going to generate an image like this. And for that, a Dockerfile will create a temporary container, put all the steps inside it, and then convert. So that way, by using the special instruction called copy, we will tell the Docker daemon to copy a file from your host machine to the temporary container, and from this, the image will be generated. So the image will have all these things, whatever that you already have inside the container, converted into image. Okay. So now, how do we do that? So this is where an example that you take, you can simply say copy, and just for showing purpose, I'll just take a file called test.conf, which is available on my host machine. And I want to copy this under test.conf. Okay. Now this will get copied inside the container under test.conf. And the image will also have the same. Okay. So let's try this. This is what we already had. Now, what I'll do, just for understanding, I don't need all the steps. So I'll just keep only from test.conf. This to be copied under and folder in this. Now let's create a file. So on the same folder, I have this file called test.conf that we have created. Okay, ignore the others, but you can see this file. Okay, so going back to Docker images, we had the image called my image 00. So every time if you rebuild it, the layers of the image will be getting overwritten. So if I say docker build -t my image 00 and the reference is dot, so that it will pick the Docker file as well as the test.conf also from the same folder. Okay, so the dot defines under which directory context the Docker file should be running. Okay, so it's not just for reading the Docker file, but for all the source, it has to read from the current folder. Okay, so we have the image created. Now just to show you, if I create the container using our image. Okay, so now if you go to temp folder, you should see that the file is available. This is how, if you want a file to be available inside an image, during runtime, you can copy from your host machine to the container and get it converted into an image. For that, you need to use this instruction called copy. Now, when you have one file, it's okay to use copy. But what if you have multiple files? Then single copy will not work. And at the same time, I cannot give multiple copy and every time I will be copying one by one file. So instead of that, what we can do, there is another instruction called add, wherein you will do the same thing. So for an add instruction, if you give a single file, it will also copy to the destination. But instead of that, if you give an archive as a source, so what do you mean by an archive? A zip file or a tar file or a gz file. So if you give that as an archive, then Docker will directly extract it. Rather than copying and extracting, it will directly extract. So whenever, sorry, whenever you have a group of files or a folder, then always create it as an archive like a tar and use add, so that add will directly extract it. Okay, just to show you an example, if I create a file called test.tar and if I put it under temp, then it will extract all the content of this into your temp folder. Okay, now how do we do that? Let me show you. So what we will do, Let me create a tar quickly. Okay. So for this, I need some files, right? So I'll just say name of the tar and what are the files you want to take. Now I'll take Dockerfile and test.conf. Okay, I'll take both of them. So now there is a tar created called test.tar. And these are the contents of the tar. Okay. Now, if I use add instruction, it will directly extract the content of this tar into the temp folder. Okay. So for that, go to the Docker file. Now instead of copy and say add, and the source is this.tar and destination, I'll just keep temp. So let's build this image again. And yeah, we have the image. So let's create a new container. And now see under the new container, if I go to temp, you can see it has directly extracted the files. Okay. So this is where what we can actually do is if you have a single file to copy, then use copy instruction. But if you have multiple files to copy, you can simply create an archive, and from that archive, you can go ahead and extract it. Okay. Can you try this now and let me know? let's try. You've tried this, then let's go to the next topic. So what we saw is an instruction to copy the file, right? Now, what happens is when you're trying to run this container, okay? Now, typically, as what user are you running everything inside? So this is where, when you're creating an image, you might have to run something first as some user inside this container, as well as you might have to switch some users, or you might have to set a default user as whom you can create a container out of it. So what will happen when you are running an application, you might have to run the application as a particular user. Then how do you switch between users, or how do you choose as what user your container should run, as well as for creating this image, what is the user as whom you want to execute all these commands? Now, for that, by default, what happens is when we use CentOS, root is the default user. So how did that set? So that is using instruction called as user. And now if you give a user name here, then anything below this instruction, if you have in Dockerfile, now that will be getting executed as the user what you give. So in fact, so far when we were running, these instructions were running as a default user called root. But when you put something as a specific user, and after that, whatever you have will be executed as the default user. And not just that, this is the same user which will become the default user for your image. Now to understand, so let's just quickly see if we have any list of default users. So let me go inside a container. Okay, so these are the only default users we have. So let me just use nobody here. Now, for example, now if I say this as user and nobody, so if I run any other instructions below that, it will be getting executed as nobody. Okay, so to understand it better, let me take one example now. What's the Dockerfile? What I'm going to do, first I'll run a command called run, and the name of the file, I'll say I am root. Now, by default, the user in CentOS image is root only. So this command will be getting executed as root. Now, let's switch the user as nobody. You run this command now. And when you try to see this, the user will be switched to nobody, and this command will be executed as nobody. And not just that, whatever the last user you have given in the Dockerfile becomes the default user for this new image that you're creating. Okay. Watch this. If I go ahead and build my image, I'm just rebuilding it. And watch this now. I'll go inside the container. Okay. And the first thing to look, you have switched the user as nobody by default. This is because the last user that you had in your Dockerfile was nobody, and that will be the default user. So any command that you are running inside the container is actually going to be executed as nobody. And to see the difference, now if I go to temp, you should be able to see the file was created as root. However, after that, whatever you tried is getting created as nobody. Okay. So this is because the default user for CentOS was root, and after that we switched to nobody. Okay. So this is how you have switching between users. Now, what if I want my default user to be root only, regardless of how many changes I do? Then you can go to Dockerfile, and in the Dockerfile, if I just add one more time user as root, then what will happen? The file will get created as different users, but once again, the default user will become root. So watch this. I'll build the image again. And now if I create the container, the default user is root. Whereas the file would have been created as different users. So this is where what you can actually do is, while you are creating the container for the image, you can tell as what user to run, and you can switch the users, and ideally, once you have done this, you can also set a default user. So the last user that you run in the Dockerfile will be the default first user for your image. Okay, so based on this, your container will be running the commands as that default user. You can just try this now and see how it works. Okay. Opened it. So whenever we say user, okay, there's one more thing that we need to know is when you go to a machine as a user, there will be some default folder in which you will be running everything, which is called as home directory. The same way, since whether we use CentOS image or other image, for every user, there will be some default folder in which you want to run everything. Because when you run the instructions, it will be running as a particular user that you tell, or it will be running as a default user. But under which folder it will run. So this is where now, since if you are using as root, it will always be executing everything from root. But if not, if you want some commands to be executed from a particular folder, then you can set another instruction called workdir and you can tell a path. So what will Docker do is anything after this instruction, if you have a command to run, that it will be executing it under a particular folder. For example, if I say temp, then anything after this I am running will be created under temp. And not just that, whatever the last workdir that you have set in your Dockerfile will be the default folder into which you will be going when you create a container from this image. Okay. Now to understand, let me show you what I'm saying. So when I create a container, by default, I'm going inside root. So if you want to change this in the image, then this will show you. Now, here what I'll do. First, let me just run a command called touch. It's creating a file. Okay, and I'll say under root. So this is just to show you where this file is getting created. Okay, so this file will be getting created under slash. However, if I change this to, let's say, temp, and then if I run this command, now this file will be created under temp folder, and temp will be the default folder for our image. Okay, so what's this? Let me build the image out of it. And we'll create a container now. In this container, so if you look at the current folder, you can see it went to temp. That is because the last working dir will becomes the default first folder in your image or during your runtime container. And in this, let's see, the under temp is created. However, if you go to root, here this under root is created. Okay, so this is how you can tell what is the folder that you want to run. Because by default, when it is running as root, everything will be executed under the root folder. Whereas if you switch to a different path, and all the remaining under that instruction will be executed in this folder. And the last workdir will be the default folder in your image. Once again, if I want to change, I can do that. So here I can set as many workdir you want, but now if I set it to root, then the default folder will be root. Even though it switches, you will be getting back as root. So let me build an image here. So we'll create a container. So now you can see default is root. And here the under root file will be there, and under the temp you can see. So this is how, similar to user, what we can actually do is set what is the current working directory for the temporary container to generate the image, as well as what will be the default folder in your image or from the runtime content. Okay, so you can set accordingly. Can you try this and see how is it different? Okay, if you tried. Now we saw copy, user, switch directory. So there's another thing called environment, that is environment variable. Because sometimes to run some application, you want to set some environment variable. So if you want to set an environment variable, then what you can actually do is you can use an instruction called env, and then you can just give the variable, okay, and equal to this value. So what will happen? While the image is getting created, the image will be built with this variable. So that when a user creates a container out of it, you will be able to see this variable is already available. And for that, you're just going to say env. For example, I'll just say my name, and this will be set inside the container. Now, quickly, let me show you that. Here, I'll just add env. Same way, you can also set multiple ones. So for example, I need Java home. So I'll just say Java home is available in the some folder you want. Okay. So let's try running this. Now inside the container, if you say env, it will show you all the environment variables available. However, if you want, say echo dollar and okay. So this is how you can set default variables and you can create the image so that for your application, whatever is needed, you're going to put everything inside the image. Okay. Try this also. Okay. So there's one more argument, or there's one more instruction called argument. This works exactly like environment variable, but what you need to know is when you set up an environment variable using env, what will happen is that will be set on the final image. Okay, but for running some commands inside your temporary container before creating an image, if you need some environment variable, then you cannot use it as env, because if you set anything as env, it will be directly going into the final image. So that's where what you can do for those local values which is needed only for the temporary container or the run instructions, whatever you're giving. Only for that, if you need, then you're going to use a new instruction called arc. So for example, here, if I say env, this will be set globally and it will be available under image. But if I want something not to be available under the image, but only for my temporary container, then I can use arc. Okay. So for example, I'll say test value. Now what will happen? This will not be set as an environment variable on the image, but only for the temporary container. Okay. And when you create an image, you will never ever see this. Now just to show you the difference. So these are the two variables which is used using env, and there is one more called test value. Now when I run this, it will be available only on the temporary container if anything has to be used. However, in the image, you will have only these two. This will not be available. Okay. For that, I go ahead and build the image. And now if I create a container out of it, you can see only these two are set. That test has not been set. Okay. So that is because anything that you set as arc, it will be only for the temporary container. In fact, if you want, you can change the value by passing during runtime. So that's where, if you want anything to be available only inside the temporary container, use arc. If you want anything to be available on the final image, then use env. Okay, so that's the difference. env will get it here, and arc will only stop. So you need to decide whether you want locally a variable or into the image. And if you want it inside the image, put it as env. Okay. So quickly try this once and see the difference if you are able to see it or not.
Adam, can you give me any real-time scenario for using arguments?
So what if you want to run some command within your temporary container, and at that time it needs some user as whom you have to run, or it needs some variable? Then what will happen? I mean to say, for running this temporary container, you are giving some run instructions, right?
Yeah.
I want to set some values for that. Then during that execution, you will use arc. Maybe for my installation of some package or some OS library, or I have to pass some username as whom it has to set for different values, or some path, which folder it has to take only during runtime. So for all of them, you can set a value and it will be available only locally. So anything that you need only for the container, not for the image.
Okay.
In fact, you can use it. Okay, one more example. What you can do is, you can in fact create it as a variable, right? And you can directly substitute. So let's say here, instead of hard coding, I can actually do like this. Okay, dollar, let's say something like PNG. Now, even though you have not declared anything, these are called as arc. And what you can do while you are creating an image, that time you can pass the option. Build ing dot. Now you can just say arc and then ing equal to symbols. Arc is not build arc. You can see we haven't hard coded anything, but anyway, it's going to take the value from what you are trying to pass. So that's where anytime if you want some variable to be available locally only for generating the temporary container before the image, you can use it as the argument. Now that you can set it locally like this, or you can also pass it through runtime so that it can change value. So instead of hard coding some value, you can try to pass it from here.
Okay.
Wonderful. Right. So now the last thing that we need to know here is, if you remember when I was going through the port mapping, what did I tell? So I tell there are two things we have to do. One is the container has to expose a port, and that you are going to map it from the host machine. However, the exposing doesn't happen from the container. So those details has to be given through the image. So this is where, when you know that the purpose of this image is for running a container, and inside that there will be some particular web application which will be listening on a port. So the exposing part should be done from your image. So while you are generating an image, you will tell the expose port number, and that is what, when you are trying to create a container using -p, right? If you go back earlier, we saw that this one. So whatever that you see here, this is not coming from the container. This is coming from the image, which was used to create a container. So that way, before creating the image, you should know what application you are going to run and what is the port in which it will be listening. And based on that, you have to expose. So for that, you will use expose and the port number. Okay. So what will happen? Here, for example, if you are running Apache or web server, then you are going to say expose and image. So this is how, when a user creates a container in the -p, this will be whatever the host port, whatever will be there, and on the right hand side, whatever that you have given is what you are going to apply. So that's how. What is that port number that has been exposed from the image is what you're going to give in the port mapping, and then the actual port which is running on the host machine. So this is how the exposing should be done as part of your image creation. Okay. Now, the same way, we can also set a default shareable folder inside your container through the image, which is where we call it as volumes. So the same way for the volume, whatever that you're going to map on your host machine, you can create. But what will happen before the container gets created? It's always a good practice that you make sure that there is a folder which you want is available and it is a shareable folder. And that's where you can create a volume. Now for this, you can simply use volume. Okay. And in the square bracket, you're going to keep the path. For example, if I know that my application is going to put a log into some folder in my container, let's say it is going to put it under var log, then I can say, if there is no folder, I can say create var log application. And then what will happen? From this image will have a default volume. So whenever the container is getting created, you should see that there will be a folder which is shareable. So this is how, what you can do is, while image creation, for the port mapping and the volume mapping, you can give the expose and the volume together. Okay. Now, to put it together everything, let's take one example and see how I can create an image. Okay. Now, what I'll do for this, I'll take a very simple example. Here, what I'll do, watch this example. I'm taking this example here, wherein I'm trying to take Ubuntu image of a particular older version, and then I'm trying to run apt update, app install, Apache, and then deleting some files. And once it is done, I'm setting up some environment variable, and I want Apache to be running on port 80, and that is what I'm exposing. And finally, what should be the default first command that I want to run? I can put it up this as my first command. So, and this is CMD. So if a user is creating an image out of it, so you are going to create your own image which has Ubuntu and Apache inside it. And if a user doesn't give any startup command, this will be the default command. But however, since you have given CMD, you can give your own default startup command and you can go inside the container. However, if I want, I can create it as a different file instead of Dockerfile. So that's where when you are trying to do Docker build, let's say I call this as my Apache. And now, if you want to tell the file name, so you can give the file name. So this is where, what is the file name that you want? Now let's say I'll call this as dockerfile.apache. And then the reference of everything is under current folder. So this is where if you are not having the file name as Dockerfile, you can have any other name, but you have to specify it. Let's create this. So I'm creating a new file. This. Let's try it. Looks like the file is wrong. Latest image. What's the problem here? It's asking for geographical area. So, problem here is this. Just be white so that I don't want any questions. Okay, let's do that. Please select the job area which will be. Okay, so the only way to solve this, what we will do, let's try doing the same one by one. Okay, this is fine, but let's say that install. Probably this will be very good. Yes. This coming from okay, how do we this is what they're asking us to run. Install comments. Okay, let's try this and see if this works. This. Okay, that's good. Okay, so what I have to do is install this by default and then go ahead with installing Apache. But anyway, if you look at this, now we have our new image created. So if I just say Docker image, my images, you can see my Apache is there. Now, in this, I just try to create a container. This time, just say B and the name of the image is image. Says config variable is not defined. Set this. Oh, it needs run the okay. Looks like so many new changes. Let me do that here. Also make this as one more variable. Delete the previous. Let's recreate a new. Yep, there you have. So this is the first container running, and based on that, if you do so you should see that Apache is running on your local machine. Okay. This is where it's all about putting all the commands that you want, wherein first you need to prepare the steps, and once the steps has been put, then you can put whatever the environment variables you want, what port number to be exposed, in fact, what user you want to run, you can set that also, and then what should be the default command to run. Just try this so that I'll tell you what are the next things in the image that we have to manage. I've just copy pasted. Can you quickly try creating a file and try to run this and see how it is behaving? Everyone tried it? You guys tried? Any issues? Okay, cool. So if you have done, you can take a 10 minutes break. We'll meet again. All right? Yeah, sure. Just take a quick 10 minutes break and we'll continue. Is everyone back?
Yes, sir.
All right. So I was talking about image generation, right? And what we saw is to generate an image, you will write a Docker file, give all the instructions that you need, and use the Docker build to generate an image. However, what happens is, if you go back to the workflow, the image that you have generated, so basically lies in your machine. So that's the reason when I do a Docker images, it's visible only in your machine. But from where did we take all the other images like CentOS or Ubuntu or Jenkins or Sonar, Nexus, right? So all those things was available in the Docker registry. So that's where, so far what we have used is a common registry called Docker Hub. However, as an organization that you go, there are several tools using which you can create your own Docker registry. Suppose if you are having a registry only for your organization within the organization's premises, then it will be called as private registry. And what we were using so far is Docker Hub, which is public registry. But however, once you have a registry, now what you have to do is, if you want to share the image, and that's the reason that you're trying to generate an image, then you need to basically put it back into Docker registry. Because what happens when we are trying to create a container, if the image is not available, it will try to download. The same way, if I want the image that I've generated should be used by others, then typically you need to push it back into the Docker registry. So that's where the Docker registry will be the common location for storing all the images in your organization. So anyone who wants should be downloading from this to their local machine and create container. The same way, when you are creating your own image, you need to store it in the Docker registry. So for this, what we will do, since we don't have any private registry as of now, okay, so you can quickly go to dockerhub.com and you can create an account quickly. Okay, just go to Docker Hub using your existing Gmail ID. So what you can do, quickly create an account. Okay. Let me sign in. Okay, so the first thing is, if you can look at it, I already have an account. So what I want you guys to do is go to dockerhub.com and register using your Gmail. And then we will have our private registry, which is only accessible to us. So how do you use it? So this is when there are a couple of things that you need to know. So whenever you generate an image, right? So all that we have learned so far is you will use an image called Ubuntu or CentOS, or go back to Docker basics. We used something called Nginx, Apache, or Jenkins. This is how we have used, correct? But few places you can see there is something in front of it, or in the first image example when we were trying, I was trying with something called Ubuntu :12. So what is the difference between them? So this is where, going forward, whenever you are referring to an image, you need to first refer the image to the registry location where it is available. Okay. Suppose if you do not give the registry location, then the dockerhub.com will be considered as the default registry. And that is where, for all of us, when we were trying to download Ubuntu or CentOS or Apache, Jenkins, Nexus, Sonar, we all took it from the dockerhub.com. But if you want to download it from a particular location that is a private registry, then you need to give the URL of it. And then followed by that, in Docker registry, you have something called as repository, wherein similar to your GitLab or any other tools, if you are accumulating certain files together, you will create it as a repository. The same way, now in Docker registry, for a particular project, if you are generating images, then you need to put it as a separate repository. And under the repository, you can have a name, which is what is the actual image name that you're going to give. Okay. And then followed by that, if you have noted, every time when we were testing some image generation, I was rebuilding the same image. For example, image 00 is what I was using again and again. But what if you want to have all the different versions of the image? So that's where for every image that you build, it is the same name that you're going to give for a particular repo. But to track differently, you can add something called as a tag name. Wherein a tag name is nothing but an additional reference name using which you can uniquely identify an image. So that every time you are doing a build, what you can do, you can change the tag so that you will know for this product, this is the image, but this is the tag which will give me exact content of it. So that's what you are going to do going forward. So remember, if you do not tell the registry, it will always refer to Docker Hub, but you need to tell what is the repository and what is the image name and then the tag name. And when you do not give a tag, whether you are downloading the image or whether you are creating an image, the tag name will always be latest. So if you go back and do Docker, you should see all those images that we downloaded had default latest. At the same time, the image that we generated will be having latest tag. Okay, so that's when while creating or downloading, you need to give particular tag. Okay, for example, if I do some change and I want to generate an image with the new tag, then while doing a Docker build, what I can do, instead of just giving the image name, I can give latest. For example, let's say this is first build, then I can give some tag name. So this indicates that this is the first copy. So the tag is just for your quick reference on what exactly you want. So like this, every time I build, the same name will be there, but tag will be changing. And based on that, Docker images, you should also see the tag. So now assume that if you want to create a container out of this, then when you say Docker run, the same way you're going to change, right? So here you're going to give tag, okay? And the same way, when you are going to now, for example, create a container out of it, then you're going to say Docker run and hyphen D, and let's say the image will be Apache :1. Then it will be exactly using this image and the tag. So whether you are creating a container or creating an image, you need to always specify the tag. If you do not give, it will always become latest. And once again, it's not just the image, you need to tell the registry and the repo along with it. If you do not tell, it will go to the dockerhub.com as the default. That is why it was working for us. Now, If I want to share the image to Docker Hub, then what we need to do is you can either create a separate repository or dynamically we can do it. For that, first from your local machine, wherever you have the image, you are going to do Docker login. And this is where it will be asking you the same username and password that you have used to connect to Docker Hub through the dashboard. So look at this. Now, Docker login. Once again, if I don't give any path, it will always go to dockerhub.com. If you want, then you should be giving Docker login space the URL of your private registry. Okay. Now I've already stored the credential. That's the reason it is asking me. If not, you can go ahead and say -user. Okay, and it will ask you the username and password for it. So for example, if I want login as Adam, and it will ask for the password. Okay, anyway, I've given the wrong password, it doesn't matter. But once you give the correct username and password, then you should get a message like this. And now from this machine, you can communicate to your Docker registry, whether you want to download or upload, it will happen. So that's when first try to do a Docker login with your Docker Hub credential, because this will be defaulting to, you need to give the registry. If you don't give the registry, it will always go to Docker Hub. And once that is done, the next thing what we have to do is you need to create a map, or what we call it as a reference of the current image to what you are going to push. That is where we call it as tag. Simply say Docker tag. What is your local image that you have generated? Its tag, and then followed by what is the registry to which you want to share. Okay, so this way you are going to do. An example will be Docker tag. For example, let's say I want to push :1. Then this is what my local image, and now where is the image available? In the dockerhub.com. So I don't have to tell the registry. Now for the repository, I will give the name of my login ID. Okay, so this will be acting as my repository, and under that, let's say I will create an image, and for this time I'll say NSEIT Apache. Okay, so it will try to create an image with this name and what tag you want. You can have the same tag or different tag. That's also possible. So let me show you. So it has created a tag. And then what you're going to do is basically Docker push. And while pushing, you are going to use this reference name. That's where you say Docker push and this name. So now all the references will be using this name. Okay. So now watch what happens. If I say, you can see, since I have not told the registry, where does it go? It exactly goes to this particular registry. Some credential has been changed. Some reason. Okay, let me fix it. Looks like some credential issue. But what you can do is now ignore this. First, go to dockerhub.com, create a new ID, and whatever the ID that you get here will be the name of your repo. So all I want you to do is, once you build the image, quickly rebuild with the tag name, and then do a Docker login with that credentials, and then do a Docker tag with a proper name of what you want in the registry plus what you have created locally, and then do a push of this. Okay. This should work. So this means now all the images that you have generated, you're pushing into a registry. And anytime if someone wants to download, then they will always refer to this name. Okay. Can you try this? First create an image with the proper tag. Before that, make sure you have an account in Docker Hub, and then login, tag, and then push. So every time when you generate an image, this is what you're going to do. If you have logged in once, then for every new image that you generate, give a unique tag, then do a Docker tag, and then Docker push. Okay. Can you try? Others, have you tried? Okay, so if you guys have tried, looks like my earlier credentials was not correct. So now I'm able to push. Okay, you can see I've pushed the image. So if I go back to my Docker Hub and refresh, should be seeing a new image. And with that, this is my repo for you guys. And here we have a tag. So every time now when I build, you have to make sure you build with the unique tag and do a Docker tag. So I'll say Docker tag in second image. So let's take image 2. Here also I'll take image 2. We'll say Docker push of this. So if you do not give the registry, you can see it always goes to dockerhub.com. And this is my repository name. And in that, we have the image name. So this is your repository name, and this is the image name and the tag. And if you go and refresh here, you should see 2 times. Okay. Fine. So what we have seen now is how do you generate an image and how do you try to push the image. But let's connect the dots now. And if I go back, why is that we are seeing, first of all, on generating an image? So this is where, if I create an image and if I put our own application inside it, then what will happen? Every time when I want to run my application, whether it is for a QA testing or it is for stage or production, instead of we doing a manual deployment, we can just take this Docker image and create a container, and everywhere you will be able to get the same environment replicated, correct? And this is where what we have to do now is, how are you going to enable your build pipeline, which could be a CI pipeline or a nightly pipeline, wherein rather than just stopping at the artifact creation, we are also going to now see how do we generate a image. Because now every time when we go through the build, let's go up and see the process. Here, every time when we do a build, what is that we were doing? We were trying to compile unit test and then generate the static code analysis and the code coverage. And then when this was successful, we were uploading the jar or var to Nexus server. But what after that? So that's where what we have to do is, now we need to make sure we generate a Docker image which has our application. And every time when we do a build, there will be a new jar or var that you're going to get. So based on that, we are going to generate a new Docker image and push that to registry. Okay. And once this is done, push to Docker registry. So this is what our process will be. And that's where your continuous integration or the build pipeline stops. Because at any point now, based on automatic check-in or based on on-demand request, when you generate a build, you're going to validate the code coverage and code analysis, and post that we are going to upload it to Nexus, and then we are going to generate a Docker image and push to registry. So now whatever that you're going to give it to QA or production will not be just a jar or a var taken from Nexus. Instead, we are going to give a deployable artifact, which is a Docker image. So in this, a user will just create a container, and wherever he creates a container, inside it, the application will be automatically up and running. And that's where we are going to now create a Docker image for our application. And that's when you should know what kind of application it is, what OS you need to take, what are the additional packages you need to install, and then what you have to copy inside the image, what will be the port map, what will be the first startup command you have to give. All those things you have to think through and generate a Docker image, so that as a user, whether it is a QA or stage or production, they will just take this image and create a container. Your application will be just running in fraction of a second. And that's what we call it as deployment. Okay, so your traditional deployment is being replaced using the Docker images. Okay, but that's where now, rather than just taking a freestyle job and configuring all of them, in order for us to help in automating and to reuse the entire pipeline, what we can do, we can start using pipeline as a code. Okay, and in that, whatever the steps that we did, so let us see how we can use or write a Jenkins pipeline code in which we can do all the steps that we did using freestyle, and that can be stored into a repository and we can reuse them. Okay, so that's when all those things what we have learned, let's try to put it together. Okay, but for that, let's take one by one what are the different steps or stages we have, and based on that, let's try to put it up. Okay, so I already have a dummy file available, so I'll just take a reference of that and I'll show you. So what we'll do, let's develop a pipeline. So for this, now the first thing that we need is we need to have a pipeline block. That's what we have learned. So we'll start with our pipeline block. Now in the pipeline, I'm going to have several stages. Okay. Now in that, for every stage, I want to run it on different machines. So then what will I do? In the beginning, I will say agent is none. And under the options, I'm saying the maximum time that I'm going to take to run the entire pipeline is 1 hour. Okay. So I'm going to give this. However, after this, we are going to have stages. And within the stage, what are the different individual stages that you're going to have? Okay. Now for that, now when I run my pipeline, the first thing that I want to do is basically do a checkout. Okay. So this is where you're going to do the clone of your entire project, and later on we will try to configure what are the different other stages that we want to put. Okay, so let's just put this as the first stage. Okay, and this is where now what I want to do is my first stage, which is I'm calling it as checkout, and I want to see where does it check out. So that's where you're going to use agent, and you can use any group that you have, and followed by that, you're going to specify on what is the repo from which you want to clone it. And in that, what is the branch that you want to take? So if you go back, now in GitLab, we had a different project for you guys. What was the project? Yeah, this is the one. Is this the one? Not this. Maven build. Okay, so this is the folder that we have, and in this I wanted to clone. So anyway, I have made this as public. So let's take this as the repo. So here I want to check out the master, and this will be my project. And where do you want to run? So you should be giving your group name. So in fact, here, if I go back to my Jenkins Master, I don't have my master started. So quickly let me start my master. So here, let's take the public DNS. So we have only one machine as of now, and what is the group name? Demo. So here what we'll do, we'll create a new pipeline. That's a new job. And we'll make this as CI underscore pipeline. Okay. And this is going to be a pipeline job. Now, we still have not completed our Jenkins file fully. So that's the reason as of now, let's not store anywhere. So let's just try to give it and try running one by one stages, and then we will complete. So let's take this up. And apply. Now, just for testing, let me go ahead and build now. So we should have our pipeline with first stage where it's going to pick up a machine based on our output, what we have given the group of machine, and in there it is going to do a git clone, and you can see it has cloned the Ratus workspace. Now after this, what is that we have to do is what we have to define stage by stage, wherein you can specify what it has to do first, what it has to do second. Okay. Now, what I'll do is check in this file. Into this project. So I'll create a new file here. Okay. And I'll call this as Jenkins file. And you can just try this. So take this repo. If you don't have this repo, then anyway. Just do a clone, or if you already have this workspace, just do a pull and you should get the latest file. From that, try to take this content of the file and create a new Jenkins job, which is of pipeline, and then just try to run and see whether your first stage is working. Can you try that? Any questions? Okay, you're done school. Others, have you tried? Okay. Sure, but bring it up if you have any questions. Okay. Fine. If you have practiced, it's well and good. But just go back and refresh all those things what we have seen so far. So tomorrow what I'll do, I'll try to extend this pipeline and we will see using the declarative way, how can we specify what are the different stages, the same thing which we did in freestyle. And we'll also include the Docker Hub how to work. Okay. Sure. Then I'll talk to you guys tomorrow. Have a good day. Yeah, thanks for joining. Thank you. Thank you.